you grow echinacea? Okay, a lot of you. So, and those of you who don't, plant echinacea, because it's really an incredible life-saving plant. And not life-saving, but it's immuno-enhancing. It really helps with your immune system. And it's beautiful. So there's no, it's just, and it's so easy to grow. You want to make sure that you get one of your medicinal varieties because it's been hybridized up the yin-yang. So you get Echinacea angustifolia, which is hard to grow, so that's only for the real good gardeners. Or you get Echinacea purpurea, which is really easy to grow. So you just ask for that because there's so many different echinaceas. Yes, honey? I don't think you have wild echinacea growing on your mountain. Oh, you do? Oh, well, excellent. Awesome. Yes, you do. We have confirmation. So if there's a lot of it, if there's plenty enough, meaning that there's a large field, then yes, you can use that. There's not so much, yeah. So I'm always hesitant to use native plants from the wild as much as I love them and respect them because there are so many. Look, we're a small gathering on a Pine Ridge up here in wherever we are in Washington, right? And these gatherings are happening all across the country, and some of them are 800 and 900 people. So there is just there's a lot of strain on our wild resources. And what I always say, support another endangered species, which are your farmers and your growers. And so to me, I'm trying to take the stress off of. So with echinacea used to be an absolutely common plant. It was a prairie plant. It covered the largest habitat in the United States, the American prairies, right? And those are our most endangered ecosystem, more than wetlands, more than forests. And there are hardly any wild echinacea. And in the state parks and the national parks, poaching is so bad on the echinacea that the rangers can't even keep up with the poachers. And most of it, by the way, was not being poached for the American public. It was all, I mentioned this, it was being shipped in massive tonnage to Germany, for medicine in the pharmaceutical companies, yes.
So, in some of the tincture books with the echinacea, and I just want your thought on it, it says it's a caution warning for people with autoimmune, do not take it.
So that's a very complex question. So the question is that when you read about echinacea and many other of the immuno-enhancing herbs, it says not to use them with autoimmune disorders because an herb like echinacea is activating the immune system, and an autoimmune disorder is your immune system has gone a little awry and it attacks itself. So it makes sense not to. However, so I'm going to just tell you that this is just my opinion, really, and there's different herbalists who have different opinions. Most practicing herbalists tend to agree with me. So first of all, it's individualistic. I would not say across the board not to use echinacea for an autoimmune disorder. So these herbs are not drug-like in their action. They have hundreds of thousands of different chemicals in them. And those chemicals are all interacting in our body in different ways. So it's not like taking a drug that's going to go in and have a single-minded action in the body. That's one thing to remember. The other is that in practice, most of these plants are really helpful for people with autoimmune disorders. Like, so echinacea, one of the examples, a very extreme example, is with HIV, really tragic autoimmune disorder, right? Echinacea is very helpful for men and women with HIV. I mean, I've seen that in practice many, many times. So I would say it's individual. If a person is working with a holistic doctor or an herbalist or a naturopath who knows about plants, they can work with them, and many of these herbs will support their system. They're actually the herbs that they need. So I wouldn't just blanketly say not to use them, and I wouldn't say to use them unless you're working with somebody who has experience. I would use that. And I do want to say, this is another thing that you see in all the books, even in mine. They always say, if you're on medication, always consult with your doctor before taking herbs. But that absolutely only makes sense if your doctor knows about herbs and natural healing. And if not, they're going to be very conscientious, and they're going to do what they have been trained to do, is say, don't use them because I don't know anything about them. They don't usually say that, but that information only makes sense if you're working with a professional practitioner who knows about plant medicine and allopathic medicine. So, yes, because I want to just finish that by saying, and that's because there are many, many, many times that herbs are really helpful to use when you're on allopathic medication. You do better. But you do have to know the herbs, and you have to know what the interactions are. So, yes.
Approximately how much tonic do you get out of that after
Oh,
you
yes.
strain it?
Well, you get almost a, you're
Yeah.
going to strain out that herb, you're going to have almost over a half a quart of that tincture. So the cost of that was, none of these herbs are expensive. These were all inexpensive herbs. And the alcohol was the most expensive. I think it was $12 for that bottle.
Awesome. And then you said earlier equal parts. Is that by weight?
No, that was by volume.
By volume. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
but they should be by weight, actually, when you're weighing out your herbs. I just did it by my hands putting them in there.
So by volume. That's all.
No, absolutely not. When you dry your plants, I'm using either a food dehydrator or any of the good drying methods, and you're using low heat, not in direct sunlight, good air circulation. The only thing you should be getting out is the moisture. So the reason that herbs used to be such poor quality is because they were dried so poorly. And so if your herbs, when you dry them, should look like the herbs do when they're fresh, minus the water. They should have the same color, have almost the smell, have a good taste. Then you know your plant is still good. What's the term for that? I talked about it earlier. Organoleptic testing, yeah. Fancy word, this means you're using your senses to determine the quality of the plant. Yes?
Is there an advantage to grinding in a mortar and pestle or breaking apart the
Oh.
leaves at all before you put it in?
Yes, thank you. That's such a good, important. So he's saying, is there an advantage to grinding it or breaking it up? So there is, yes. The more plant parts that are exposed, the more the solvent, the menstruum, can do its work extracting. So I don't have to worry about that with these leaves, because these leaves are going to break down so, the chemicals are going to draw out so quickly. But if I'm using woody substances, barky substances, really coarse material, then it's good to put it in the blender with your menstruum and just whiz it for a minute and just get it broken down. Or mash it even. You can mash it in the blender, or chop it up, if it's a really coarse material. Then you can chop it up really well and put it in there. Yeah, so the more plant material exposed to the menstruum, the more of the properties are going to be drawn out. Yes. Yes, honey.
What's your recommendation for cleaning like the roots and things in the ground?
Yeah, that's a good. I can tell a lot of you have a lot of. So cleaning roots in the ground. So if you're doing a lot of root digging, rooting and barking, we call it, a lot of rooting, more than just for home use. Getting one of those old wringer washing machines, where they have that thing that goes. That's how a lot of the small companies do it, because you put your herb in there with water, and then it just goes. You don't put it through the wringer, you're putting it in the tub part, and it cleans it really, really well. Otherwise, you just sit out. You get as many of your neighbors and friends and family, and you sit out there with a vegetable scrub brush and a toothbrush and your hose, and you're just cleaning them. Yeah, there's no easy way. When they're really dirty, you just kind of take a peeler and cut off the bad parts. Yeah, it's handwork. And by the way, that's the reason I didn't really say this, and I do want to acknowledge this. We have really excellent companies in this country making excellent herbal products. And so I never begrudge the cost, because having made products, I realize the time and energy and focus and intention that goes into that. So when I'm buying a $15 bottle of tincture or $12, I know that really that's very little for the amount of energy, time, conscientiousness that went into it. So I wanted to point that out. It's cheap medicine, really, but for home use, this is easier. Like to buy this much brain tincture, just like that would be really expensive.
Do you have any thoughts on freeze drying your herbs?
Yeah, so you can freeze dry your herbs. Yeah, you can just freeze them. So that's another way. You put them in a food processor, grinder, all your fresh herbs. Like, let's say an example of jewelweed. You want to have jewelweed. Do you have jewelweed? I think I saw it growing down by the stream. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw it down there by the stream. So very baby though. But let's say you want to have a poison oak remedy or an insect bug remedy for later in the season. So you get all your jewelweed. You put it in the blender. You don't even need to add water to jewelweed because it has so much moisture in it. You blend it up. You put it in one of the freezer trays, and you let it freeze for overnight, and then pop it out, and then you put them in your Ziploc bags and put it in your freezer. You can do that with your culinaries. Let's say you want to have fresh herbs in the wintertime, that are really fresh tasting. Just grind them up and put them in the freezer. Betty.
She was asking about freeze drying.
Yes, and so you can freeze dry them too. I was going to get back to that. I got sidetracked on the freezing and the freezer bags. Yeah, so that's another way of preparing them is freeze drying. So long as you're not using high heat and the heat is low, that should work just fine. Do your organic lipstick test. You test them, you taste them, you smell them, you look at them. It should work great. Freeze drying, I think, would be fine. I'm not 100% sure on that, actually. Try it and see. Yes, honey.
Do you have a recommendation on where to buy online some herbs? Do you have any places you like to, if I can't grow them for whatever reason?
Yes, and then I'm going to keep going with our medicine making. I'll answer this question. So I always hate to give out sources because there's so many good companies. The very first thing I would always do is say, check and see who's growing and making these things locally. So if you have a local source, use your local source, right? But companies that provide herbs that are really good quality, by the way, they're all in the West Coast. You have Mountain Rose Herbs in Oregon, in Eugene, and you have Oshala Herbs. They just produce incredible quality herbs. They're in the Applegate Valley, Oshala Herbs. They're in the Applegate Valley. You have one of the best tincture companies in the country in Oregon, Herb Farm. It was actually one of the first herb companies, and the quality of their herb tinctures are just off the charts. And then my daughter of the heart, I call her. She came through a marriage, and then her husband are medicinal herb farmers and have been for about 30 years. Jeff and Melanie Carpenter, they have Zackwood Herbs Farm, so they grow medicinal herbs. They wrote a beautiful book called The Medicinal Herb Grower, Organic Medicinal Herb Grower, which is for both home-growing medicinal herbs and also commercial growing. And so there's other ones as well. There's many good companies that are growing them.
Repeat the last one.
It's called Zackwood's Herb Farm. Zackwood's. They're on the East Coast. The other ones I mentioned are... and I'm sure you have good ones. So it's finding local companies, really. Yes?
Friends of the Trees.
Oh, yes, and of course, Friends of the Trees. Thank you. My good friend Michael Pileski, who holds herb conferences and has wonderful, incredible plants, all wildcrafted and organically cultivated.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.